The dog was going to die. That's what they said. 200 pounds of military-trained Belgian Malinois, blood-slicked and snarling, standing over an unconscious Navy SEAL on a hospital gurney, and every person in that ER was backing away. Security had their hands on tasers. An administrator was already on the phone screaming about liability. And a 24-year-old nurse named Mia Bennett, the newest hire on the floor, was walking toward it. Not running. Walking. Calm as stone. Because she saw something none of them did. The dog wasn't attacking. He was the only reason that soldier was still breathing. If this story has you gripped already, hit follow, hit like, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The shift started ordinary enough, which should have been the first warning. Mia Bennett arrived at Riverview Horizon Medical Center at 6:45 in the evening, 15 minutes before her night rotation began, because she had learned early that a late nurse was a nurse already behind. She changed in the locker room, pulled her dark hair into a tight bun, drank half a cup of terrible coffee from the break room machine, and clocked in at 6:59. The charge nurse on the outgoing shift, a heavy-set woman named Paula, handed her the board without making eye contact. "Light night," Paula said. "Chest pain in Bay 3, waiting on labs. 2 in the waiting room, 1 ankle, 1 possible UTI. The drunk in Bay 1 finally stopped singing." "Good shift then," Mia said. Paula gave her a look that could have meant anything. "Sure." She left. Mia picked up the board and started her rounds. She'd been at Riverview Horizon for 8 months, which made her the second newest hire on the floor. The newest was a 22-year-old named Darren, who had transferred from a small urgent care clinic in Beaverton and spent most of his shifts looking mildly terrified. Mia had graduated near the top of her nursing cohort at Oregon Health Sciences 2 years prior, completed a competitive residency program, and still got called the new girl by nurses who had been there 12 years. She had stopped correcting people around month 4. The ER at Riverview Horizon was a mid-sized urban floor, not the massive Level 1 trauma centers downtown, but not a rural clinic either. They saw gunshot wounds sometimes, car accidents, industrial injuries from the shipping yards along the river. It was the kind of floor where you got good fast or you got out fast. Mia had gotten good. She was charting notes on the chest pain in Bay 3 when the radio crackled at the triage desk. She heard dispatch first. Not the words, just the tone. There's a register that emergency dispatchers use when something has gone genuinely wrong, different from the clipped routine of a standard call. Mia looked up from her chart. The triage nurse, a man named Garrett with 15 years on the floor, had gone very still. "Inbound trauma," the radio said. "Male, late 30s, blunt force and lacerations, loss of consciousness at scene, ETA 4 minutes. Also advising, there is a large working dog with the patient. Handler is unconscious. Dog has not been separated." Garrett turned from the radio and looked at Mia. "Did they just say dog?" Mia asked. "They did. In the ambulance. With the unconscious patient." They looked at each other for a moment. "I'll call Hale," Garrett said, reaching for the phone. "Wait until we see what we've got," Mia said. She was already moving toward the ambulance bay. Itet. The doors came open at 7:22 p.m. The paramedics came in fast, wheeling hard, and Mia saw the patient first. Big man, broad through the shoulders, wearing what was left of a dark tactical shirt that had been cut open somewhere between the scene and arrival. There was blood on his face and more blood soaking through the trauma pad on his left side. His eyes were closed. His breathing was audible from 6 feet away. Irregular, too shallow, with a wet quality that put Mia's stomach tight immediately. And then she saw Titan. The dog was on the gurney beside the man's legs, not restrained, not crated. He had somehow stayed in that position during the ambulance ride, and he was enormous. A Belgian Malinois, maybe 90 pounds of muscle and dense coat, and he had blood on his muzzle and both front paws that Mia was already clocking as not his own. His eyes were moving, tracking everyone in the room with the controlled precision of something that had been trained to assess threats for a living. One of the paramedics, young, looked rattled, said, "He wouldn't leave the patient. We couldn't separate them at scene. The dog was... We tried to..." "It's okay," Mia said. She was looking at the dog, not the paramedic. What's the patient's name? Unknown, no ID on him. Military-style gear, comms unit, no wallet. We called it in to dispatch. They're trying to... Vitals. BP 88 over 60 and dropping, pulse ox 91, heart rate 112, GCS was 8 at scene, may have dropped since. Mia moved to the head of the gurney, keeping her body language open, her movements slow. The dog's eyes tracked her immediately. His ears went flat. A sound started low in his chest. Not quite a growl, more like a vibration, a warning. Behind her, she could hear people stopping at the bay entrance. She could hear the sharp intake of breath from the nursing station. Someone said, "Oh my God." And someone else said, "Get security." And neither of those things helped her at all. "Easy," she said quietly, directed at the dog. She wasn't sure he understood English commands. She wasn't sure what commands he'd been trained on, but tone crossed language, and she kept hers low and level. "Nobody's moving him, you hear me? Nobody's taking him anywhere." The dog looked at her. His ears came up a fraction. She reached the head of the gurney and got her first real look at the patient's airway, and the next 60 seconds were about him and nothing else. She called the orders. She needed a physician. She needed a crash cart ready. She needed a second IV line because the one the paramedics had placed was already compromised, and the room responded the way a good ER room responds, which is to say professionally and fast, because the shape of the man's breathing told everyone with eyes what they were dealing with. Dr. Marcus Webb was the attending on duty. He came in from the trauma bay at a controlled jog, took one look at the gurney, took one look at the dog, and said, "What is that?" "Military working dog," Mia said. "Handler's unconscious. I need you focused on the handler." "Mia, he's bleeding into his chest cavity, Dr. Webb. I can hear it. The dog is not the problem." Webb looked at her. Then he looked at the dog. Then he looked at the patient, and he heard what she heard, and he put his hand on the stethoscope around his neck and moved to the patient's side. The dog watched him. Did not move. Did not escalate. Mia exhaled. She was monitoring the patient's airway, relaying numbers back to Webb when she became aware of the presence behind her. She didn't have to turn around. She knew the footsteps, the particular authority in them, the cadence of someone who had decided something before they entered the room. Victor Hale was the hospital's director of operations. He was 47, trim in the way of men who went to the same gym every morning out of discipline rather than enjoyment, and he had the face of someone who had learned to hold his expressions very still. He was not a doctor. He had an MBA and a background in hospital administration that stretched back 20 years, and he ran Riverview Horizon's operational side with an efficiency that the board praised in quarterly reports. He was also, in Mia's 8 months of observation, a man who cared enormously about liability and almost nothing about patients. He stopped at the bay entrance. "What," he said, "is that animal doing in my emergency department?" "Treatment," Mia said, without turning around. "That is not an answer. The patient is a trauma case, the dog is with the patient, and separating them by force right now would require us to pull personnel off a man who is actively crashing, so the dog stays." She heard him pull out his phone. "I'm calling security." "Mr. Hale," Mia said, and now she turned because she needed him to see her face when she said the next part. "If you bring security in here right now and that dog escalates, we lose control of this bay. We lose control of this bay, we lose the patient. That man does not have time for us to manage a containment issue. The dog is calm. He's not attacking anyone. Let me do my job." Hale looked at her the way he looked at the vending machine when it failed to dispense his granola bar, with cold personal offense. "This is a massive liability issue." "Then write it up later," Dr. Webb said, without looking up from the patient. "Mia, I need you here." Hale did not leave, but he did not call security. He stood at the edge of the bay like a man accounting for something, and Mia turned back to the patient, and for a few minutes the only sounds were the monitors and the measured cadence of medical work. The dog's name, she found this out later from a detail on the trauma bag that one of the paramedics had brought in with the patient, was Titan. It was stitched into a patch on the bag's exterior along with a unit designation she didn't recognize, and a phone number for Military K-9 Command that dispatch was already trying to reach. In the moment, she didn't have a name. She had a 90-pound dog with military-grade training, a patient who needed a chest tube, and an operating room that wasn't going to be available for another 8 minutes because there was a surgical case already in progress. She stayed close to the gurney, close enough that the dog could see her without moving his head. She'd learned this in a context that had nothing to do with hospital nursing, a 3-week emergency response training program she'd completed during her second year of school back when she'd been considering a different path. The program had included one afternoon session on working dogs, how they were trained, how they communicated, how to approach them when their handler was incapacitated. It had been a 3-hour block of instruction that she had filed away without ever expecting to need. She needed it now. She kept her body angled slightly sideways, presenting as small a profile as possible. She kept making eye contact without holding it too long. She kept her voice at the same low register she'd been using since the ambulance bay. And gradually, very gradually, she watched the dog's posture shift. The rigid, maximum alert position he'd been holding since arrival started to settle. Not relaxed. Military working dogs didn't relax in strange environments, but the vibration in his chest went quiet. "Good," she said softly. "Good boy. Nobody's going anywhere." She reached out her hand, flat, below his nose level, and waited. The dog looked at her hand for a long moment, then he lowered his head and let her make contact with the side of his jaw. Behind her, she heard someone exhale, long, ragged, like a person who had been holding their breath for several minutes. She thought it might have been Garrett. Teet. Webb got the chest tube placed. The OR cleared at 8:04 p.m. They moved the patient, and Titan moved with the gurney, walking alongside it in a controlled heel that told Mia everything she needed to know about his training, to the elevator and up to the surgical floor. Mia rode up with them. She'd already called ahead to the surgical nursing team to explain the situation. There was a moment in the elevator when Titan pressed against her leg, not in the frantic way of an anxious dog, but in the deliberate way of something communicating. She put her hand on his back. "He's going to be okay," she said. She didn't know that for certain, but she said it anyway. The surgical team met them at the doors. There was a tense 30 seconds while the OR coordinator, a woman named Sheila, who had been at Riverview Horizon for 22 years and had opinions about everything, stared at Titan and opened and closed her mouth. "He can wait outside the OR," Mia said. "Right here, in the hall. I'll stay with him until we get someone from the military K-9 unit here." "That is absolutely not standard protocol," Sheila said. "No," Mia agreed. "It's not." Sheila looked at Titan. Titan looked at Sheila. "He better not pee on my floor," Sheila said, and stepped aside. Yeet. She sat on the floor outside the OR for 40 minutes. Titan sat beside her, oriented toward the OR doors, watching them the way he'd been watching the patient, with the focused patience of something that had been trained to wait for things that mattered. Mia leaned against the wall, updated her notes on the tablet she'd grabbed on the way out of the ER, and answered questions from 2 different nurses who came by, ostensibly for other reasons but actually to look at the dog. She knew she was probably already in trouble with Hale. She'd seen his face when she'd turned around in the bay. She'd done the calculus on that somewhere around the chest tube insertion and decided it wasn't a calculus worth running right then. There would be paperwork. There would possibly be a conversation with HR. She'd handled paperwork before. What she hadn't expected was Diana Whitmore. The head of nursing services arrived on the surgical floor at 9:15, in the particular way of administrators who had received an urgent phone call and were making sure their displeasure was visible from 20 feet away. Diana Whitmore was in her early 50s, with close-cut silver hair and the bearing of a woman who had built her authority over decades, and was not accustomed to having it questioned. She had been at Riverview Horizon for 17 years. She had supervised Mia's onboarding. She had shaken Mia's hand on the first day and said, "We run a tight floor here," in a tone that meant something specific. She stopped when she saw Titan. She looked at the dog for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Mia, sitting on the floor beside him. "Get up," she said. Mia stood. "Tell me," Diana said, "that you did not spend the last hour managing that animal instead of your floor." Garrett covered my patients. I called it before I came up. Everyone in Bay 3 is stable. The ankle is discharged. The UTI is... That is not the point. Then what is the point, Diana? The head nurse's mouth tightened. The point, Ms. Bennett, is that you made a unilateral decision to keep a dangerous animal in my emergency department. A completely unauthorized, protocol-violating, liability-creating decision that Victor Hale has already documented and sent to the board. The animal isn't dangerous. That is not your determination to make. It was in the moment, Mia said. There wasn't time to convene a committee. Don't be smart. I'm not being smart. I'm being accurate. That patient was hemorrhaging. The dog was not aggressive. He was protective, and I had training in... You are a first-year nurse, Diana said. The words landed with deliberate weight, like she was placing each one down separately. You do not have the authority to override hospital protocol. You do not have the authority to countermand the director of operations. And you absolutely do not have the authority to turn this hospital's surgical floor into a kennel. Titan's ears moved. He made no sound. Mia looked at Diana Whitmore and did not say any of the things she was thinking. The patient is in surgery, she said instead. The dog's unit has been contacted. Someone will be here. Someone from your floor is going to escort that animal out of this building, tonight. You can't do that. He's a military working dog, Diana. There are federal... I can do exactly that, Diana said, because this is my hospital and that is my floor. And you, she stepped closer, dropping her voice so only Mia could hear it, are standing on ground you have no right to be standing on. You are going to go back downstairs. You're going to finish your shift. And tomorrow morning you are going to meet with me and Victor Hale and the HR director, and we are going to talk about whether you have a future here. Mia held her gaze. And the dog, she asked, is not your problem anymore. But she went back downstairs. She finished her shift. She did it methodically, precisely, without making any additional waves, because the patients in bays 2 and 4 and 6 needed a nurse who was present, not one who was litigating an argument in her head. She pushed it all into a compartment and closed the lid and did her job. At 2 a.m, a call came through from the surgical floor. The patient, still listed as John Doe, was out of surgery and in recovery. Prognosis was guarded but stable. The surgical team had found significant internal bleeding and 2 cracked ribs, with a secondary issue involving his left shoulder that would need follow-up. He hadn't regained consciousness yet. Mia wrote the update in her notes and kept moving. At 4:15, Garrett found her in the supply room. Hales called a 7 a.m. meeting, he said. Wanted you to know. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Garrett was not a man who spent a lot of words on things, which was one of the reasons she'd always respected him. That was good work tonight, he said finally. What you did in the bay. Thanks, Garrett. I'm just saying. He left. She finished counting the IV supplies she'd come in to count, and she noted that they were low on a specific gauge of catheter, and she wrote it on the restocking list like nothing else was happening at all. The meeting was at 7 a.m. in the conference room adjacent to the administrative wing, the one with the long table and the window that faced the parking garage. Victor Hale was already seated when Mia arrived. Diana Whitmore arrived 2 minutes later. The HR director, a woman named Cora something, sat in the corner with a laptop open. Nobody offered Mia coffee. Hale spoke first. He was measured about it, precise, unhurried, the way he would have been if he were presenting at a board meeting. He outlined the incident. He used the word unauthorized 4 times in the first 2 minutes. He used the phrase created significant liability exposure twice. He did not once use the word patient. Mia listened. She had resolved, on the drive-in, to listen fully before she said anything. The bottom line, Hale said, lacing his hands on the table, is that your actions last night created a situation that could expose this hospital to serious legal and financial risk. You disregarded direct instructions from the director of operations. You kept an uncontrolled animal in a clinical setting. And based on a review of last night's incident log, this is not the first time you've made unilateral decisions that fall outside the scope of your role. He slid a folder toward her. We've compiled a performance review. Given the pattern of behavior and the severity of last night's incident, we've made the decision to terminate your employment effective immediately. Mia looked at the folder. She did not open it. The patient, she said. Do you know who he is yet? Hale blinked. It was a small tell. That's not relevant to this discussion. It might be. Miss Bennett, the dog, she said. Titan, do you know where he is right now? Diana Whitmore made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a scoff. The animal was removed from the premises at approximately 2 a.m. by hospital security. It was turned over to who? Mia asked. A pause. Diana glanced at Hale. Animal control? Hale said. Standard protocol. Mia went very still. A military working dog, handed to animal control. At 2 a.m. She looked at the folder on the table in front of her. Okay, she said quietly. We'll need your badge and your locker key, Hale said. HR will walk you through the exit process. Mia set her badge on the table. She set her key beside it. She pushed her chair back and stood up, and she was careful about how she did all of those things because she understood that how she left this room mattered. She picked up the folder. She said, I want to note for the record that the patient presented last night with a hemothorax. He needed a chest tube within the first 10 minutes of arrival. If I had cleared the bay to manage the dog, which is what the protocol would have required, he would have died before we reached him. That is my clinical assessment, and it is not in your incident report. Nobody said anything. Thank you for your time, she said. She walked to the door. She was in the hallway, 15 feet from the conference room, when she stopped walking. Not because anything had happened. She just stopped and stood there for a moment in the fluorescent quiet of the administrative corridor, the folder in her hand, her badge and key on a conference table behind her. She had known, somewhere, that this might happen. She had known it in the ambulance bay the moment she stepped toward that gurney instead of away from it. She had made the choice with clear eyes, and she still believed it was the right choice. And she was still, in this hallway, at 7:15 a.m, after a full night shift, not entirely sure what to do with the fact that right choices sometimes cost exactly this. She exhaled. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. She didn't see the black SUVs pulling into the hospital parking lot, still 2 blocks away, moving in a tight formation that turned heads on the street. She didn't see the man in the front passenger seat of the lead vehicle holding a phone to his ear and listening to the person on the other end of the line with an expression that had long since passed anger and arrived somewhere colder and more deliberate. She didn't hear what he said when he hung up. She was already in the elevator. The doors were closing. The lobby counter showed 7:19 a.m. when Mia Bennett walked out of Riverview Horizon Medical Center into the pale morning light, her jacket over her arm, the folder under her hand, and her phone already showing 6 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. All from the last 40 minutes, all starting at approximately 6:40 a.m. All from an area code she was almost certain was a federal military exchange. She stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital entrance and looked at her phone. The 6th missed call had a voicemail. She pressed play. The voice that came out of her speaker was controlled and clipped in the way of someone who communicated in situations where being unclear was not an available option, and it said, "This is Commander Ethan Cross, Naval Special Operations. We are trying to reach the nurse who treated Petty Officer First Class Daniel Rourke last night. If you are that nurse, do not leave the hospital. We are 6 minutes out." Mia lowered her phone. She looked at the parking lot entrance. She looked back at the hospital doors behind her, and then, at the far end of the hospital access road, she saw the first of the black vehicles make the turn. There were 3 vehicles. Black, unmarked, moving with the kind of unhurried certainty that didn't need speed to be threatening. They pulled into the hospital access road single file, and even from 40 feet away, Mia could see the set of the driver's shoulders in the lead SUV. Military posture, the kind that didn't come from a gym. She stood on the sidewalk and did not move. The lead vehicle stopped at the curb. The passenger door opened before the engine cut, and the man who stepped out was not what she'd expected from the voicemail, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. Commander Ethan Cross was somewhere in his early 40s, medium height, built compact and efficient. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark pants, a gray jacket, but they sat on him the way civilian clothes always sat on career military, slightly wrong, like a translation that got most of it right. His face was controlled but not blank. There was something working behind it. He saw her standing there with her jacket over her arm, and the folder in her hand, and he walked toward her with the directness of someone who had already decided this conversation was happening. "Mia Bennett," he said. Not a question. "Yes." He stopped 2 feet away, looked at her for a moment with the evaluating quality of someone accustomed to making fast reads. "You got my voicemail 30 seconds ago." "Were you leaving?" She glanced back at the hospital doors. "I was told to." Something shifted in his expression, just slightly. "Who told you to leave?" "The director of operations and the head of nursing services. About 20 minutes ago." She paused. "They terminated my employment." Cross looked at her. Then he looked at the hospital. Then he looked back at her, and in that sequence of looks there was something moving. Not surprise, not quite anger, more like a piece of information slotting into place. "Come with me," he said. They went inside, not through the main entrance, which Mia registered as deliberate. The two men who had climbed out of the second vehicle were already moving toward the side entrance near the administrative wing, and Cross's direction took them through the ER ambulance bay, the same bay where everything had started less than 12 hours ago. The overhead lights were the same flat white. The floor had been cleaned. Bay 1 was empty. It felt entirely different in the morning. That was always the strange thing about hospital ERs, how completely they reset, no residue, no indication of what had happened in the same space the night before. Cross walked with her toward the nursing station without explaining what he was doing, and Mia didn't ask. She was operating on the particular calm that comes after a significant thing has already happened, and there's no use spending energy on the aftermath yet. She had been fired. She was walking back into the hospital with a Navy commander she'd met 90 seconds ago. Her shift ended at 7. It was 7:23. Garrett was still at the station. He looked up when she came through, and his eyes moved to Cross, and then to the two men who had entered through the side and were now visible at the far end of the hall, and his face did a complicated thing. "Mia." "I know," she said. "Is Diana Whitmore still in the building?" "Administrative wing, meeting with the board liaison, I think." "And Hale?" "His office." Cross had been quiet beside her, absorbing the layout. Now he spoke, not loudly, directed at Garrett. "I need to know the current status of Petty Officer Rourke. He was admitted through this ER last night." Garrett looked at him. "Are you—" "Commander Cross, Naval Special Operations." He produced identification without being asked, held it open. "Rourke is one of mine." Garrett looked at the ID. He picked up his phone. Daniel Rourke was on the 4th floor, Recovery Room B. He had come out of surgery at approximately 2:30 a.m., was responsive but had not yet been cleared for conversation, and the surgical resident currently covering the floor had noted in his chart that his blood pressure was still unstable. Mia read this from the tablet Garrett handed her and handed it to Cross without comment. Cross read it. His jaw tightened. "And tighten," he said. She'd been waiting for that. "Animal control," she said. "Around 2 a.m. The hospital administration made the call." She kept her voice neutral, factual, the way she would deliver a clinical report. She did not say what she thought of it because she wasn't sure she had the capacity right now to say it in a controlled way. Cross looked at her. Then he pulled out his phone and turned away and made a call that lasted approximately 45 seconds and consisted on his end mostly of listening. When he hung up, he said, "Titan's at the county facility on Morrison. He's fine. We're pulling him now." He said it calmly, but there was something under it, something that had been pressurized and was held there by discipline. "Mr. Cross," she started. "Commander?" "Commander, I need you to understand what happened last night, because I think there are some pieces you don't have yet." "I'm beginning to see that," he said. "Awesome." She told him. She did it efficiently in the same conference room she'd been fired in 45 minutes earlier, which had a specific quality of absurdity that she decided not to think about. She told him about the ambulance bay, about the chest tube, about Hale arriving at the door and the conversation that followed. She told him about the surgical floor and Diana Whitmore. She told him about the meeting that morning. Cross sat across from her with his hands flat on the table and did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Your assessment," he said, "if you hadn't managed Titan when you did." "Rourke would have died," she said. "I'm not hedging that, His blood pressure was already in the low 80s on arrival. He had a hemothorax, and the window for the chest tube was narrow. If we'd pulled personnel off to manage a containment issue for a dog that wasn't actually threatening anyone, she stopped. He had maybe 10 minutes. Cross looked at his hands on the table. And they fired you for it, he said. Yes. He exhaled through his nose. It was not a loud sound, but it carried weight. I need to speak with Hale, he said. His office is on the second floor. I know where his office is. He stood up. I'd like you present for that conversation. I was just terminated. I know. He looked at her with the level steadiness of someone who had operated in environments where the situation was always more complicated than it looked and had learned to navigate that rather than be paralyzed by it. Do you want to be there or not? She picked up her folder. Yes, she said. Victor Hale's expression when his office door opened and Cross walked in was the expression of a man whose morning had been difficult and had just become significantly more difficult. He was behind his desk. He had coffee. He was on his computer. He was the picture of administrative authority in his own space. And then Cross was in the room, and two of his people were at the door and Mia was behind them, and he looked at the badge Cross set on the corner of his desk, and the picture changed. Commander Cross, Hale said. He recovered fast. She'd give him that. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. We don't, Cross said. He sat down without being invited to. I'm here about Petty Officer First Class Daniel Rourke, currently recovering on your 4th floor from a procedure that, from what I understand, came extremely close to being unsuccessful. The patient that came in last night, Hale said carefully. My operator, Cross said, who came in last night with a traumatic hemothorax accompanied by his military working partner, a Belgian Malinois designated Titan, under Naval Special Operations K-9 Command. He paused. I understand your hospital sent Titan to animal control. Hale's jaw moved. The dog represented a significant safety risk to Titan has a federal designation, Cross said. He is military equipment under the authority of the United States Navy. Sending him to a municipal animal shelter without authorization from my command is not a gray area. The color in Hale's face changed in a way that Mia watched with the detached attention of someone observing something clinical. We weren't aware of the dog's status, Hale said. There was no documentation. There were 6 calls made to this hospital between midnight and 2 a.m. from my operations coordinator attempting to establish contact. The calls were logged. None of them were returned. Cross kept his voice even. It was more unsettling than if he'd raised it. I have those records. Hale looked at Mia. She looked back at him without expression. This employee, he said, violated hospital protocol by introducing an uncontrolled animal into a clinical environment. This nurse, Cross said, with a precision that made the correction land cleanly, made a clinical judgment call that kept my operator alive long enough to reach your surgical team. That's not my assessment. That's the assessment of your own surgical team, which I've already spoken with this morning. He let that sit for a second. And your response was to terminate her employment. The silence in the office had weight. Hospital protocol, Hale started. I'm going to stop you there, Cross said, because we can talk about protocol, and we will. But I want you to understand what we're talking about first. He leaned forward slightly. Daniel Rourke has 3 combat deployments. He has a Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars, one with Valor. He was injured in the course of an active operation 3 nights ago and was transported to this facility because it was the nearest trauma center. Titan, who your staff sent to animal control, was the reason Rourke was found at all. The dog located him after the accident and stayed with him for 2 hours in the field until rescue arrived. He paused again. These are the people your hospital decided to manage as a liability issue. Hale opened his mouth. He closed it. I'd like to speak with your board of directors, Cross said, today. Diana Whitmore was harder. Mia hadn't expected that, and then she had, because Diana had built 17 years here and wasn't going to let it shift without resistance. She met them in the corridor outside the nursing services office. She'd clearly been warned by someone, maybe Hale, maybe her own sources, and she arrived composed, silver-haired, every year of her authority visible in how she stood. Commander, she said. She didn't look at Mia at all, which was its own kind of statement. Ms. Whitmore, Cross said. I'll be brief. I need to understand the sequence of decisions made last night regarding the patient in Bay 1 and the military working dog that accompanied him. I've already prepared a full incident report. I've read the incident report, he said. I'm interested in what's not in it. Diana looked at him. Something in her expression recalibrated, just slightly. I followed hospital protocol regarding uncontrolled animals in clinical spaces. The incident report reflects that accurately. The incident report states that the dog was removed due to safety concerns, Cross said. It doesn't note that the dog's military status was identified prior to removal. It doesn't note that my command made 6 contact attempts before the dog was transferred. And it doesn't note that the nurse who managed the situation and who your own surgical team has confirmed made decisions consistent with preventing the patient's death was terminated the following morning. He tilted his head slightly. I'm trying to understand what the incident report was written to accomplish. Diana's composure didn't break, but it thinned. Ms. Bennett made unauthorized decisions that created significant liability. Her decisions are the reason you have a living patient on your 4th floor instead of a deceased one, Cross said flatly. I'd appreciate you not describing them as a liability to me. The hallway was quiet. A nurse at the far end had found a reason to stop moving. Diana Whitmore looked for the first time at Mia. The look lasted 2 seconds, then she looked back at Cross. I'll cooperate fully with any review process. I know you will, Cross said. Shimad. Work was awake. Not fully. He surfaced and submerged with the irregular rhythm of someone still on significant pain management, and the surgical resident who met them at the door to recovery room B was cautious about time and about stimulation and about the patient's blood pressure, which was still doing things nobody was entirely comfortable with. Cross went in first. Mia waited in the hall. She stood there for a while. A few nurses passed. One of them, a woman named Priya, who worked the 4th floor day rotation, stopped and looked at her and said, I heard what happened. That's wrong. Thanks, Mia said. Priya hesitated, then kept walking. There wasn't anything else to say. Cross came out after about 8 minutes. He looked like a man who had seen something he'd been holding his breath about and had now released it. He's oriented, Cross said. He asked about Titan before he asked about his shoulder. A pause. We're retrieving Titan now. I told him. How did he look? Cross thought about it for a moment. Rough, but he's Rourke. He said it the way you'd say something about a person you'd trusted your life to, which was probably accurate. He wants to see you. Mia looked at the door. He doesn't know who I am, she said. He knows someone kept Titan in the building when they tried to remove him. He knows a nurse made the call on the chest tube. Cross paused. He asked me to find out who it was. I told him I already knew. She went in. The room was dim, the blinds angled. Rourke was on his back, his left shoulder in a brace, an IV in each arm, monitors tracking the steady work of his heart. He was bigger than she'd registered last night, though that wasn't unusual. People looked different when they weren't crashing. He had the kind of face that had been through things, weathered without being broken. He looked at her when she came in. You're the nurse, he said. His voice was rough, scraped down to its fundamentals by anesthesia and exhaustion. I'm a nurse, she said. Mia Bennett. They tell me you kept Titan in the building. I tried to, she said. They moved him at 2 a.m. I didn't have the authority to stop it by then. He absorbed that. Cross says you're the reason I made it to surgery. Dr. Webb's the reason you made it through surgery. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not quite. You're deflecting. I'm being accurate. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, the hospital moved with its usual steady hum. They fired you, he said. Yes. For doing the right thing. She didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that fit neatly. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. The IVs, the brace, the monitors reading out his still precarious status, the way he was holding his body with the careful attention of someone managing significant pain. Don't apologize to me. You're the one who got hurt. People get hurt, he said. Doesn't mean other people should lose their jobs over it. She pulled the chair from the corner and sat down because her legs were tired and she had been up for over 24 hours and she was human, which meant there was only so long she could hold all of this upright. "How are you feeling?" she asked. It was a nurse question. She asked it because it was the right question, not because she was performing. "Like I got hit by a truck." "You got hit by something," she said. The paramedics weren't specific. "Vehicle accident," he said, "on a road that doesn't exist on any map." He said it without irony, just stating facts, and she understood that the next question she might ask was one he wouldn't answer, and she didn't ask it. "Titan found you," she said instead. "Yeah." Something went through his face when he said it, something real and unguarded, the kind of thing people showed when they forgot to manage their expression. "He always does," he checked. She was in the hallway, outside Rourke's room, leaning against the wall and eating a granola bar she'd found in her jacket pocket, when Cross found her again. He had his phone in his hand. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. "The board meeting," he said, "is at 11. It was 9:40. "I'm not an employee anymore," she said. "The board is going to want to talk to you." "Why?" "Because my legal officer just sent them a letter, and the letter references your termination extensively." He paused. "And because Rourke's unit is considering what level of formal review we want to request regarding the hospital's handling of an injured service member and a federal military asset." She looked at him. "You're going to make a case," she said. "We're already making it," he said. "The question is whether you want to be part of that conversation or whether you'd rather—" "I'll be there," she said. He nodded. She finished the granola bar. The wrapper was the only thing in her pocket now, along with her phone and a chapstick and a pen she'd been carrying for 8 months with the hospital's logo on it. She looked at the logo on the pen. She put the pen back in her pocket. Cross was already moving toward the elevator, talking low and fast into his phone, and Mia pushed off the wall and followed him, because there was a board meeting in an hour and 14 minutes, and she had never spoken to a hospital board in her life. And she understood, distantly, that what happened in that room was going to determine a great deal about what came next. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Victor Hale, in the 40 minutes since Cross had left his office, had been on the phone with the hospital's legal team and had drafted a formal preemptive statement attributing the military's inquiry to miscommunication and positioning the termination as a standard protocol enforcement action. She didn't know that Diana Whitmore had requested a private meeting with the board liaison before the 11 o'clock meeting. She didn't know what either of them had said. But she was about to find out. The elevator ride to the second floor took 40 seconds. Mia spent them looking at the floor indicator and thinking about nothing in particular, which was what she did when she needed her brain to stop processing and just run quiet for a moment. Cross was beside her, still on his phone, speaking in low, clipped sentences that she wasn't trying to follow. One of his people, the younger one, with close-cropped hair and a permanent expression of alert neutrality, was behind them. The board meeting room at Riverview Horizon was larger than the administrative conference room. It had a longer table, better chairs, and a wall of windows facing west that would catch afternoon light. But at 10:45 in the morning, just showed gray Portland sky. There were 7 people already seated when Cross walked in, and Mia counted them the way she counted things in a trauma bay, fast, assessing, noting what each face was doing. She recognized 2 of them. The board liaison, a man named Gerald Pratt, she'd seen at the annual staff meeting in March. The medical director, Dr. Susan Okafor, she knew by reputation, 30 years in academic medicine, had published extensively on trauma protocols, came to Riverview Horizon 2 years ago after a distinguished run at a research hospital in Seattle. The other 5 were strangers, which meant they were board members, which meant they were people who had power over the hospital's direction and limited daily knowledge of what actually happened on its floors. Hale was already there, seated to Pratt's right. Diana Whitmore was beside him. They had arrived first, which was a strategic decision, and Mia understood it as one. She sat at the far end of the table. Cross sat across from Hale without any ceremony. Pratt opened the meeting by saying that the board appreciated Commander Cross's time and wanted to understand the situation fully, and that Riverview Horizon was committed to both patient safety and military-community relations, and that this was an opportunity for collaborative dialogue. He said all of it in the tone of a man managing a situation he hadn't expected to be managing on a Tuesday morning. Cross waited for him to finish. "Mr. Pratt," he said, "Bye. I'm going to lay out what we know. After that, you can ask questions and I'll answer them. What I'd like to avoid is spending this meeting managing language, because I don't have time for that, and frankly, neither does your patient on the 4th floor." Pratt blinked. "Of course." Cross laid it out. He was methodical, chronological, specific, sourced. The accident, Titan's role in locating Rourke, the transport, the condition on arrival, the timeline of events in the ER. He cited the surgical team's notes directly, reading from his phone. He described the 6 contact attempts from his operations coordinator between midnight and 2 a.m. He described Titan's transfer to animal control. He described the meeting at 7 a.m. and what had come out of it. He did not editorialize. He did not raise his voice. He presented it the way a man presents evidence that is so straightforward it doesn't need drama to land. By the time he finished, the gray sky out the windows was the only thing moving. Dr. Okafor spoke first. She was looking at Hale when she said it. "Victor, the surgical team's assessment is in the chart?" "The patient record is—" "I've read it," Okafor said. "I'm asking if you read it before you conducted the 7 a.m. meeting." Hale's expression held. "The termination decision was based on the operational incident, not the surgical. The surgical outcome is directly related to the operational incident," Okafor said. "That's the point. The protocol violation created a liability, a protocol violation that, by the surgical team's account, prevented a patient death." Okafor set her pen down. It was a small motion, but the way she did it closed something. "I want to hear from Ms. Bennett." Mia had been waiting for this. She'd used the time Cross was speaking to organize what she wanted to say, and more usefully, to decide what she wasn't going to say. She wasn't going to be angry. She wasn't going to be defensive. She was going to tell the board exactly what she had told Cross, cleanly, in order, without asking them to feel anything about it. She did that. She spoke for about 6 minutes. She included things Cross hadn't mentioned, the specific clinical indicators she'd assessed on Rourke's arrival, the reason she'd made the airway the first priority, what she'd been watching for in Titan's behavior, and why she'd believed the dog wouldn't escalate. She described the conversation with Hale in the bay in factual terms. She described what Diana Whitmore had said on the surgical floor in factual terms. She did not say that it had felt like being punished for doing her job correctly. She didn't say it because the board could see it without her saying it, and pointing at the obvious was not the same as making a case. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the board members she didn't know, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, said, "You mentioned training in emergency response and working dog behavior. Can you tell us more about that?" 3-week intensive program during my 2nd year of nursing school, Mia said. I'd been considering a different career path at the time. The program included a module on military and law enforcement K-9 units, recognition, approach, de-escalation for handlers who are incapacitated. I didn't end up pursuing that path, but the training stayed with me. "And you believe that training was the reason you were able to manage the dog successfully?" "I think it helped me read the situation accurately. Titan wasn't aggressive. He was scared, and he was protecting his handler. Those look similar from a distance, but they're completely different problems." She paused. "If I'd treated it as an aggression situation, we would have had a containment problem. I treated it as a fear response situation. That's why it de-escalated." The woman with the reading glasses made a note. Hale spoke again. He was measured about it, but Mia could hear the pressure he was holding in check. "The concern from operations standpoint is precedent. If we allow individual nurses to override established safety protocols based on personal judgment, the protocol exists to prevent harm," Okafor said. "If the nurse's judgment was that following the protocol in this specific situation would cause harm, that is exactly the kind of clinical call we train nurses to make." "She's a first-year nurse." "She was correct," Okafor said flatly. Hale fell quiet. Cross, who had been silent through all of this, said, "I want to raise something else." He set his phone on the table, face up. My legal officer has identified 3 previous incidents at this facility where complaint records about Mr. Hale's conduct and patient care decisions were flagged and not formally investigated. I'm not here to prosecute a personnel issue, but I want the board to have a complete picture. Pratt looked at Hale. Hale was very still. Those records, Pratt said carefully, would be internal HR documents. 2 of them were filed with the State Medical Oversight Board, Cross said. They're not internal. The meeting went another 50 minutes. Mia sat through most of it in the particular suspension of someone watching events develop that they are part of but no longer driving. The board members asked questions. Cross's people provided documentation. Dr. Okafor asked to review Rourke's admission chart in real time and did so on a tablet, and when she looked up from it, her expression had shifted into something that didn't bode well for either Hale or Whitmore. At 12:15, Pratt called a 10-minute recess. Mia went to the hallway. She drank water from the fountain near the elevator bank, which was slightly too warm, and stood at the window at the end of the hall looking at the parking garage. She was tired in the way that goes past the body into the bones, the kind of tired that 8 months of night shifts had taught her to function through but not to ignore. She had now been awake for 28 hours. She had been fired and unfired pending review in the same morning. She had testified in front of a hospital board while not technically being an employee. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. Then she read it. It's Rourke. They gave me a phone. Titan is back in the building. They brought him up. Thought you'd want to know. She looked at the text for a moment. She typed back, "That's good. How's your blood pressure?" 3 dots. Then, "Annoying everyone apparently. How's the meeting? Still happening. Cross is good at this stuff." A pause, then, "Thank you for staying." She didn't answer that. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to the conference room. The board reconvened without the recess lasting 10 minutes. It lasted 7, which meant something had been decided faster than anticipated. Pratt was standing when she came back in. Hale and Whitmore were still seated, but something about their positions had changed in the way of people who have been told something while she was outside. "Ms. Bennett," Pratt said, "the board would like to formally acknowledge that your termination this morning was not properly authorized under hospital employment policy, specifically in that it did not complete the required review process before the decision was communicated to you. As of this meeting, that termination is rescinded. We'd like to discuss with you what the next steps look like, and we'd like to do that." "Can I ask something first?" Mia said. Pratt stopped. "What happens to the patients on my floor while this gets sorted out?" she asked. "Because I've been off the ER since 7 a.m., and it's now past noon, and I'd like to know who's covering." There was a beat of silence. Dr. Okafor made a sound that might, in other circumstances, have been a laugh. She turned it into clearing her throat. "We have staff covering," Pratt said. "The floor is covered." "Okay," Mia said. "Then yes, I'd like to discuss next steps." Hold. She was out of the boardroom by 1:30. She had not in the end been formally reinstated on the spot. That would require a formal HR process that the board wanted conducted correctly, which she understood as meaning they wanted documentation in place before anyone could challenge it. Okafor had pulled her aside after and said, in the direct manner of someone who didn't waste words, "You'll be back on the floor within the week. I'm going to personally review your performance file, and I want to talk to you about something else too when this settles." She hadn't said what the something else was. Mia hadn't asked. She found Cross in the hallway outside the elevators. He was typing on his phone and looked up when she approached. "Board meeting outcome," he said. Not a question. He'd clearly been briefed already. "Rescinded. Pending formal process." She paused. "What about Hale and Whitmore?" "Administrative review," Cross said, which in my experience means they've been told to expect a more formal action, and the board is deciding how to manage the optics of it. He put his phone in his pocket. "That's an internal hospital matter. My concern is Rourke and making sure the record is accurate." "The record will be accurate," she said. "Okafor will make sure of it." He looked at her for a moment. "You've been up all night." "I'm aware. You should sleep." "I will." She meant it. "I want to check on Rourke first." Cross said, He's asking for a status update on Titan. Of course he is. Cross almost smiled. It was brief, controlled, but it was there. Right. Titan was in the corridor outside room B, which was where Mia least expected to find him, and which made complete sense once she understood that the fourth-floor nursing staff had apparently conducted an informal vote on the matter. He was on a military-issue lead held by a young Navy handler named Specialist Voss, who looked barely old enough to vote and was managing the leash with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it since his teens. Titan was sitting at the exact angle and posture of a dog performing a perfect stay and making it look effortless. He saw Mia before she reached the corner. His ears went up, not the flat threat assessment position from the night before. Straight up, oriented, the posture of recognition. She stopped walking and let him come to her within the lead's reach, and he did. Closed the distance and pressed his head against her hand with a deliberateness that had nothing frantic about it. Just acknowledgement. She scratched behind his ear, and he tolerated it with the dignity of a professional accepting an award. He doesn't do that with people he doesn't know, Voss said, watching. We met last night, Mia said. I know, he knows. She stood there for a moment in the corridor, the dog's head against her hand, the hum of the hospital floor around her, the IV monitor beeping its steady rhythm through the closed door of room B. She was tired, and she was still technically somewhere between employed and not employed, and she had no idea what the rest of the week was going to look like. And all of that was true at once, and it didn't stop the moment from being what it was. She went into room B. Rourke was more awake than he'd been that morning. His color was better. Not good, but better. And the erratic blood pressure readings from earlier had settled into a more stable pattern. He still had both IVs. His shoulder was still braced. He looked at her when she came in with the awareness of someone who'd been waiting and had stopped trying to look like they were waiting. Titan's outside, she said. I know, I could hear him. She pulled the chair close to the bed. She'd been doing that all day, pulling chairs close to things, because her body was making decisions about conservation of energy without asking her. Cross told me what happened in the board meeting, Rourke said. Good. Saves me explaining it. He looked at her. He had pale gray eyes, the kind of eyes that absorbed things rather than reflected them. They're going to let you come back. Looks like? But they haven't said yes yet. Formal process, she said. It's a liability thing. They want the paperwork in place. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone was walking past the door with a cart that needed a wheel replaced. She could hear the irregular rhythm of it. That's backwards, he said. Yes, she agreed. You made the right call. Multiple people have told me that today. Does it help? She thought about it honestly. Somewhat. He exhaled, carefully, the way people breathed when their ribs weren't fully cooperative. I was conscious, briefly, in the ambulance. She looked at him. I could hear the monitors. I could hear someone talking to Titan. He paused. I didn't know who it was, but I knew he wasn't panicking, which meant whoever was with him knew what they were doing. And He stopped. I let go. I just let go and figured whatever happened next was going to get handled. She didn't say anything. That was you, he said. The surgical team handled it, she said again, and he gave her a look that said he understood what she was doing and he was letting her do it, but he wasn't fooled by it, and that was fine. She stayed for another 20 minutes. They talked. Not about the incident, mostly. He told her that Titan had found him after the accident by scent tracking in near-zero visibility conditions, which was not something she'd known was in the dog's capability set, and she said, I'm going to need a few minutes to think about that. And he said, most people do. And it was the closest thing to a normal conversation she'd had in the last 18 hours. When she stood to leave, he said, Bennett. She stopped. When they bring you back, he said, don't let them make you smaller to fit. You got it? She looked at him. The braced shoulder, the IVs, the monitors doing their work. Get some rest, she said. She went out to the corridor. Titan watched her go. Voss gave her a small nod. She took the elevator down. She was in the parking lot, keys in hand, when her phone rang. Not Cross this time. Not a number she recognized. She answered because she had been answering unknown numbers all day, and at this point it seemed like the only policy that made sense. Miss Bennett. The voice was female, older, careful. My name is Patricia Garland. I'm the chair of Riverview Horizons Board of Directors. We haven't met. Mia stopped walking. Ms. Garland? I've spent the last hour reviewing the documentation that Commander Cross's legal officer provided, along with the surgical team's notes and the incident log from last night. A pause. I also spoke with Gerald Pratt, who gave me his account of this morning's meeting. Okay, Mia said. I want to be direct with you, Garland said. What happened to you this morning was wrong. The rescission of your termination is not a process outcome. It's the correct moral outcome, and I want you to hear that from someone at the board level who is saying it without qualifications. Mia was quiet. I also want you to know that the board is in an active conversation right now about the administrative decisions that led to this situation. That conversation is not concluded, but I wanted to contact you directly before the end of today. I appreciate that, Mia said. One more thing, Garland said. I'm going to ask you something, and I want your honest answer, not the politic one. Okay? If we ask you to come back, when we ask you to come back, do you want to? Because after what you've been through today, I would understand if the answer was complicated. Mia stood in the parking lot of Riverview Horizon Medical Center, her keys in her hand, the gray Portland sky overhead. 29 hours of wakefulness sitting across her shoulders like weight. She thought about the chest tube and Rourke's blood pressure at 88/60, and Titan's ears going flat and then coming up again. She thought about Garrett's face when she walked back in with Cross. She thought about Dr. Okafor setting her pen down. She thought about the man lying in a hospital bed who had let go and trusted that someone would handle it. Yes, she said, I want to come back. Good, Garland said. I'll be in contact tomorrow. She paused. Get some sleep, Ms. Bennett. The call ended. Mia stood in the lot for another moment. Then she got in her car. She had her hand on the key in the ignition when her phone rang again. Cross this time. She answered. There's something you need to know, he said. The measured control she'd heard in his voice all day had a different texture now. Not panic, nothing like that, but tighter. Something has come up with Hale. What kind of something? The State Medical Oversight Board complaints I referenced in the meeting. He paused. My legal officer pulled the full files. There are 5 of them, not 3, and one of them is from 14 months ago, involving a patient who died. The complaint alleged that Hale intervened in a treatment decision for operational reasons and overrode the attending physician. Another pause. The complaint was filed. It was also closed. 14 months ago, Diana Whitmore signed off on the closure. Mia's hand was still on the key. She buried it, she said. It looks that way. The parking lot was quiet around her car. Someone walked past with their head down, coat collar up against the morning's leftover chill, not looking at anything. Does the board know? She asked. They will in approximately 20 minutes, Cross said. My legal officer is sending the full file package to Patricia Garland right now. He paused. I wanted you to hear it from me first. She sat with that for a moment. This changes things, she said. Yes, he said. It does. She looked at the hospital entrance through her windshield, the glass doors, the orange Riverview Horizon logo above them, the security desk visible just inside. Cross, she said. Yeah. The patient who died, 14 months ago. Do you know who it was? He told her the name. She did not know the name. She had not been at Riverview Horizon 14 months ago. But the name landed with its full weight because it was a name attached to a person, and the person was dead, and the record of why had been signed away by someone who was, right now, sitting in this building drawing a salary. She took her hand off the key. I'm coming back in, she said. She put the key back in her pocket and walked toward the entrance. The doors opened for her the same way they'd opened every shift for 8 months. Automatic, indifferent, a mechanism that didn't know or care whether she was employed. The security desk guard, a man named Earl who was 62 and had worked the desk since before the current building wing was constructed, looked up when she came in and gave her the small nod he gave everyone. She nodded back. She went to the elevator. Cross met her at the second floor. He was in the hallway outside the administrative wing with his phone in his hand and the focused stillness of someone managing multiple threads simultaneously. He looked at her when she stepped off the elevator, assessed something, seemed satisfied, and turned to walk with her without preamble. Garland has the file package, he said. She's convening an emergency board session, 45 minutes. Where are Hale and Whitmore? Hale is in his office. Whitmore. He paused. We're not certain. She was in the nursing services wing 20 minutes ago. Mia processed that. She might have been tipped. Possibly. By who? Hale's the obvious answer. Whether he's thinking clearly enough to make that call right now is another question. He glanced at her. You know the layout of this building better than I do. Where does she go if she's trying to get ahead of something? Mia thought about it. In 8 months, she'd learned a hospital the way you learned any building you spent most of your waking hours in. Not the official map, but the real geography. The shortcuts, the quiet spaces, the rooms that got used for things they weren't officially used for. She knew which conference room had the best cell signal. She knew which bathroom on the surgical floor had a broken lock that hadn't been fixed in 4 months. She knew that Diana Whitmore, when she needed to have a conversation she didn't want documented, used the small family consultation room on the 3rd floor near the chapel annex. Not because of the chapel, which Whitmore never actually entered, but because the room had no security camera and the nurses' station on that floor was understaffed on day rotations. 3rd floor family consultation, she said. Room 3C. Cross said something into the comm piece she'd only just noticed he was wearing and pivoted toward the stairs. Mia went with him because he hadn't told her not to. Room 3C was empty when they reached it, but it had been recently occupied. There was a coffee cup on the side table, still warm, and a yellow legal pad with the top 3 pages removed. The wire spiral at the top held the ghost impressions of what had been written, which meant nothing to her but which Cross photographed anyway. She was here, he said. Then she's moving. He nodded and stepped back into the corridor, speaking again into the comm. Mia stood in the doorway of the small room and looked at the coffee cup and the yellow legal pad and thought about what you wrote on 3 pages when your career was starting to collapse, and you needed to think. Probably something like a list of names, people who knew things, people who owed you, people who could, if approached correctly, confirm a version of events. She thought about the closed complaint from 14 months ago, the one with Diana Whitmore's signature on the closure. She thought about what it took to close something like that. Not just the signature, the process leading to it, the conversations, the pressure, the decision to look at a dead person's file and move it from the active column to the resolved column. You didn't do that alone. She went back to the hallway. Cross, she said. He turned. The complaint closure. Whitmore signed it, but someone in the state oversight board had to process it. Someone had to accept the closure without pushing back. She paused. That's not standard. A patient death complaint doesn't just close because the hospital says it should. He looked at her with an expression that shifted. You think there's an external party? I think it would be worth knowing who the case officer was at the oversight board when that complaint was filed. He was already on his phone. She went to the 4th floor while he worked. Not because she had a plan, because she was 30 hours without sleep and running on something that wasn't exactly adrenaline anymore, and being useful in a specific concrete way felt like the only sustainable mode of operation. Rourke was awake and annoyed at his blood pressure monitor, which was apparently alarming every time he moved his arm above a certain angle, and Titan was in the corridor with Voss and looked at Mia when she came off the elevator with the same immediate recognition as before. Hey, Mia said. Titan pressed his nose briefly against her palm and then sat back to his formal position. He keeps doing that, Voss said. He sounded mildly bemused. He doesn't do that with the floor nurses. He knows me from last night, she said. I know. He knows it's been more than 24 hours. She went into Rourke's room. He looked at her when she came in, and she could see him reading her face in the specific way of someone trained to extract information from expressions, which meant he'd already gotten most of what he needed before she said anything. Something's happening, he said. Several things, she said. The board is reconvening. Because of the other complaint. Cross told you. Cross tells me things, Rourke said. It's a command structure thing. He shifted carefully against the pillow, managing the shoulder. The woman who closed it. Whitmore. She's in the building somewhere. They're trying to locate her. He was quiet for a moment. How many years? 17 here. Before that? She paused. I don't know her full history. 17 years, he said, not as a comment on the length of time, but as a comment on what 17 years in a place meant. What you built, what you protected, what you decided you couldn't afford to let surface. Yes, she said. He looked at the window. The patient, 14 months ago. Did Cross tell you anything about them? Just the name. That's usually enough, he said, and the way he said it told her he understood something about names standing in for entire stories. She sat down. She hadn't meant to, but the chair was there, and her body made the decision. You should be at home, he said. Probably. You're not going to leave. Not yet. He didn't push it. He was, she was discovering, a man who didn't push things that were already clear. Mia, he said. She looked up. When this is over, when it's fully over. He paused, working through it. I want to make sure the right people know what you did. Not just Cross. Not just this board. There are people in my unit, people I work with. They cycle through civilian medical facilities when they're stateside. They should know which hospitals have people worth trusting. She looked at him. That's a kind thing to say. It's also a practical thing, he said. Those two aren't exclusive. Her phone buzzed. Cross. She looked at the message, found Whitmore. Board wants you present, now. She stood. I have to go, she said. I know. He glanced toward the door. Tell Titan I said sit tight. He knows, she said, and walked out. Diana Whitmore was in the main conference room on the second floor, the one from the 11 o'clock meeting, and she had not, as it turned out, been trying to flee. She'd been on the phone. For the better part of 40 minutes she had been on the phone, and what she'd been doing on that phone was what Mia had predicted in the corridor outside room 3C, building aversion. Mia understood this when she walked into the conference room and saw the expression on Patricia Garland's face. Garland was the kind of woman who had chaired boards through difficult things and had developed, over time, a face that gave very little away during active proceedings. Right now, her face was giving away the specific quality of someone who has received two contradictory accounts of the same event and has already formed a view on which one is accurate, but is conducting due process anyway. Whitmore was at the table. Hale was beside her, and Mia noted that the physical distance between them was smaller than it had been at the morning meeting. They had moved toward each other in the way of people who had decided, in the face of a common threat, to present as a unit. Cross was at the far end. His legal officer, a woman named Lieutenant Reese, who had arrived sometime in the last hour, and who had the particular energy of someone who operated in an environment where being thorough was load-bearing, had a laptop open and documents arranged in a specific order that Mia recognized as prosecutorial from the shape of it. Garland looked at Mia when she came in. Ms. Bennett, sit down, please. She sat. We've been having a conversation, Garland said, about the complaint record from 14 months ago. Mr. Hale and Ms. Whitmore have provided their account. Commander Cross's legal officer has provided documentation. These accounts are not consistent with each other. She set her hands flat on the table. I want to work through that inconsistency directly, and I want to do it with everyone present, because I'm not going to have this board make a decision based on partial information. Hale started to speak. Garland raised one hand and he stopped. Victor, she said, I'm going to ask you to listen first. Lieutenant Reese pulled up a document on her screen and turned the laptop so the table could see it. This is the original complaint filing, February of last year. The complainant was the family of a 41-year-old patient named Marcus Webb, not the physician currently on staff, a different individual, who died following complications from a treatment delay. She paused to let that land. The treating physician's notes indicate that the treatment plan was altered after a conversation with hospital administration regarding bed allocation and insurance authorization. The physician's notes specifically flag that the alteration was made at administrative direction and against their clinical recommendation. The room was quiet. The physician's name, Reese continued, is Dr. Adele Fontaine. She is no longer on staff at this facility. She resigned 11 months ago. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Her resignation letter, which we obtained from state employment records, cites a work environment incompatible with ethical medical practice. Garland was looking at Hale. Hale was looking at the table. The complaint was closed 8 months after filing, Reese said. The closure documentation lists the reason as insufficient evidence of institutional misconduct. The signature on the closure is Ms. Whitmore's as head of nursing services, countersigned by the Oversight Board's case officer at the time. She paused. We've identified that case officer. His name is Robert Seibert. He retired from the Oversight Board 4 months after the closure. He now consults privately for 3 hospital networks in the Pacific Northwest, one of which is the parent organization of Riverview Horizon. The board member with the reading glasses took them off. Garland said carefully, "Are you suggesting that the complaint closure was coordinated between this hospital's administration and an Oversight Board employee who subsequently entered a consulting arrangement with this hospital's parent organization?" "I'm presenting the documented timeline," Reese said. "The interpretation is the board's." Whitmore spoke. Her voice was controlled, but it was the control of something held very carefully. The complaint was reviewed according to standard process. The case officer's subsequent employment is a separate. Diana. Garland's voice was not loud, but it had the quality of a door closing. "I need you to stop talking right now, not because I'm prejudging what you're going to say, because I need to speak with legal counsel before this conversation continues, and anything you say in this room in the next hour is going to be part of the official record of this proceeding." She paused. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" A long moment. Whitmore understood. Her face showed it, the precise, unwilling recognition of someone who had been navigating institutional systems for 17 years and had just heard the specific language that meant the system had turned around. "Yes," she said quietly. Hale broke first, which surprised Mia, and she suspected surprised Hale himself. It happened at 3:47 in the afternoon, in the hallway outside the conference room, when the board called a 30-minute recess to allow Garland to consult with the hospital's legal counsel by phone. Hale had stepped into the corridor. Mia had come out for water. They were briefly alone, not by design, just by the architecture of the moment, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the operational blankness, something rawer. "I didn't know about the Oversight Board connection," he said. She looked at him. "I want you to know that," he said. "I knew about the complaint. I knew Diana had managed it. I didn't know about Seibert." She considered him. He was 50 years from a man who had made a great many decisions based on institutional leverage and liability calculus, and he was standing in a hospital corridor at 3:47 in the afternoon, looking like someone who had just understood what those decisions had cost and couldn't fully compute the number. "There's a dead patient," she said. "I know." His name was Marcus Webb. Hale looked down. "You fired me this morning," she said. "For keeping that patient?" She gestured vaguely toward the ceiling, toward the 4th floor. "Alive." He didn't answer. There wasn't an answer. She'd known there wasn't when she said it, but she'd said it anyway because it needed to be in the air between them. It needed to exist somewhere outside of her. She walked back into the conference room. Cross found her at 4:15 when the recess had stretched to 50 minutes, and the board's attorney had arrived in person, which told Mia everything about the direction this was going. He sat beside her at the far end of the conference table, which had emptied while they waited, and spoke low. "Garland is recommending immediate administrative suspension for both Hale and Whitmore, pending a full internal review. The board's attorney is advising them that the Seibert connection creates a mandatory reporting obligation to the State Medical Oversight Board." He paused. "And the family of Marcus Webb is going to be notified. Mia absorbed this. The family, she said. Do they know? No. They were told the complaint was resolved through insufficient evidence. They accepted it. He paused again, and she could hear the weight in it. They've had 14 months of insufficient evidence. She sat with that. Outside the conference room windows, the afternoon had gone flat and gray. Portland's particular brand of overcast that wasn't quite rain, but wasn't not rain either. What happens to Seibert? She asked. That's going to take longer. The Oversight Board has to conduct its own investigation. There are employment records, financial records. It's going to be a process. He looked at her directly. It's not going to be fast, and it's not going to be fully visible. Some of it is going to happen in rooms you won't have access to. I know, she said. That's how these things work. Does that bother you? She thought about it honestly. Yes. And I know it shouldn't because the alternative is no process at all, and no process is worse. But yes. He nodded like that was the correct answer. Reese appeared in the doorway. Board is reconvening. Garland read the board's immediate decisions at 5:03 p.m. She read them standing, which Mia noted as a choice. She could have remained seated, but she stood, which put everyone else at a different elevation and made clear that this was a pronouncement, not a discussion. Victor Hale was placed on immediate administrative suspension with pay pending a full internal review by an independent third party. He was to surrender his access credentials and vacate his office by end of business. Diana Whitmore was placed on immediate administrative suspension without pay pending investigation. The without pay distinction reflecting the board's preliminary finding that her signature on the complaint closure represented a material action of significantly greater gravity than Hale's. Dr. Susan Okafor was appointed Interim Director of Operations for the duration of the review period, a decision that had clearly been made in the 50-minute recess and that Okafor received with the expression of someone who had been asked to do something inconvenient and necessary and had already said yes. And then Garland looked at Mia. Ms. Bennett, she said, the board formally acknowledges that your termination this morning was retaliatory, procedurally improper, and contrary to the hospital's stated values regarding patient advocacy and clinical judgment. We are reinstating your position effective immediately, with full back pay for the hours missed, and we will be documenting this incident in a manner that makes the record unambiguous. She paused. We'd also like to schedule a formal conversation with you next week, at your convenience, about your role going forward. Dr. Okafor will be part of that conversation. Mia sat very still. Thank you, she said. Across the table, Hale and Whitmore were in the process of becoming something different. No longer the administrators they had been this morning, but something else, something pending, something contingent on what the next several months of review would determine. Hale was looking at the table. Whitmore was looking at the window. Neither of them looked at Mia. She noticed that she felt less satisfaction about this than she'd expected. Not nothing. There was something there, some release of pressure that she'd been carrying since the morning, since the folder hit the table, since she'd said okay in that quiet, held way. But it wasn't the clean emotion she might have expected. It was tangled up with Marcus Webb's name and Adele Fontaine's resignation letter and 14 months of a family who thought something had been resolved and hadn't known what that meant. She stood when the board dismissed, and she was in the hallway and almost at the elevator before she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Okafor. A moment, the medical director said. She was direct about everything, including requests for time. They stood to the side of the corridor. The conversation next week, Okafor said. I want to prepare you for what we're going to discuss, because I think you'll want time to think about it. She paused. We're going to be reviewing our emergency nursing protocols in the context of what happened last night, not to add more bureaucracy, to remove the places where rigid protocol overrides clinical judgment in ways that create patient risk. She looked at Mia steadily. I want a nurse involved in that review who has both clinical floor experience and demonstrated ability to make sound judgment calls under pressure. Another pause. You're the nurse I have in mind. Mia looked at her. I've been here 8 months. I know. There are nurses on this floor who've been here 15 years. I know that too. Okafor's expression didn't move. Those nurses are valuable, and I rely on them. What I'm describing is different. It's not a seniority decision. It's a judgment decision. She paused. Think about it over the weekend. That's all I'm asking. She walked away before Mia could answer, which felt deliberate, leaving space rather than waiting for an immediate response. Mia stood in the corridor and thought about it for about 10 seconds, which was probably not the full weekend Okafor had suggested, but was enough to know what her answer was going to be. She went up to the fourth floor. It was almost 6 p.m. when she got there. The shift change was happening, day rotation handing to evening, the organized chaos of nurses catching each other up on patients, the brief parallel moment when both teams occupied the same space. Mia moved through it. People looked at her and she could see them tracking what they'd heard through the building's informal information network, which was fast and mostly accurate. Priya from that morning gave her a look that said, "I told you so," without saying anything. Garrett, who was apparently still here somehow, gave her the same small nod from that morning, which from him was essentially an ovation. Titan was still in the corridor. He was lying down now, which apparently he'd decided was acceptable given the length of the wait, and he raised his head when she came off the elevator and watched her approach with his ears up. She crouched down to his level. "You can go home soon," she said. He put his chin on her knee. Voss, above them, said nothing. He'd learned over the course of the day when to leave a moment alone. She went into room B. Rourke was awake, sitting slightly upright, blood pressure stable at the last reading. He looked at her when she came in and did the fast read on her face again. Whatever he found there made something in his expression shift. Not relief exactly, but the quiet decompression of someone who has been managing a controlled tension and can finally release it. "Done?" he said. "For today," she said. "There's more process. Reviews, investigations. It's going to take months. But the immediate situation. Hale and Whitmore are suspended. Okafor is interim director. I'm reinstated." She sat in the chair. "And the family of a man named Marcus Webb is going to find out this week that the answer they got 14 months ago wasn't the real one." He was quiet for a moment. "That's the hardest part." "Yes." He looked at her. "You holding up?" "I'm 31 hours without sleep." "That's not what I asked." She looked at the window. The Portland sky had gone darker, the flat gray deepening toward evening. "I think so. Ask me again in a week." He almost smiled. "Fair." Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number now saved in her phone as Lieutenant Reese. State Oversight Board formally notified at 17:45. Case opened. Seibert has been contacted. She showed it to Rourke without comment. He read it. His jaw moved slightly. "Good." "It's a start," she said. "A start isn't a finish." "No," he said, "but it's something." She put her phone away. She was about to stand, about to say she needed to go home and sleep for approximately 12 hours, when her phone buzzed again. Not Reese this time. Not Cross. A number she didn't recognize at all, Bisset, no area code she knew, no state she could place, and the text was 4 words. She read it again. "We need to talk." She turned the phone over and looked at the back of it like the answer might be on the outside. Then she turned it over again and read the 4 words a third time, and felt something cold move through her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Because the number was not in her contacts. She had never given this number to anyone outside of the hospital's HR system and one emergency contact form. And the only people who had access to that form were hospital administration. She stared at those 4 words long enough that Rourke noticed. "What is it?" he asked. She turned the phone and showed him the screen. He read it. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened in a specific way she'd come to recognize over the course of a very long day. The shift from recovery mode to operational mode. The part of him that didn't fully switch off regardless of IVs and shoulder braces. "Unknown number, what?" he said. "Yes. And you think the only people with access to the number are hospital administration. HR system and emergency contact forms. That's it." She took the phone back. "I've been here 8 months, and I've never gotten a text from an unknown number. Today I get fired, rehired, and..." She held up the phone briefly. "This." Rourke said, "Show Cross." She was already texting him. Cross's response came back in under a minute. "Don't reply. I'm coming up." He arrived 4 minutes after that, and he had Reese with him, and the way they both looked at the phone when Mia handed it over told her this was not being treated as a coincidence. Reese photographed the screen, then the phone's settings panel, then the full incoming call and message log. She did it efficiently and without commentary, the way someone processes evidence rather than curiosity. "Can you trace it?" Mia asked. "We can request carrier records," Reese said. "That takes time." She handed the phone back. "But the number pattern is a VoIP line, probably routed through an app." "Which means someone who knew what they were doing," Cross said. "Or someone who downloaded a $5 app," Reese said, and the flat pragmatism of that landed in the room like something useful. "We don't know yet." Mia looked at the message again. "We need to talk." 4 words that could mean a dozen different things, from threatening to informational. And the only honest thing she could say about her gut reaction was that it didn't feel threatening. It felt urgent. Those were different. "My HR file," she said. "Who has access to it right now, given that Hale and Whitmore are suspended?" "Officially, HR Director, Dr. Okafor is interim and the board," Cross said. "And unofficially?" A pause. "Anyone Hale or Whitmore gave access to before they were suspended," Reese said. "Systems access doesn't always terminate the moment a suspension is issued. There's usually a lag." Mia looked at Cross. "Hale said something to me in the hallway. During the recess, he said he didn't know about the Cybert connection, that he knew Whitmore had managed the complaint but not the rest of it." "You believed him?" Cross asked. "I believed he was surprised," she said carefully. "Whether that's the same as innocent is a different question." She paused. "But if he was telling the truth, if there are parts of what Whitmore built that he didn't have access to, there might be someone else who did. Someone outside this building." Cross and Reese exchanged a look. "Reply to the message," Cross said. Mia looked at him. "Keep it simple. 1 line. See what comes back." She typed, "Who is this?" She sent it before she could second guess it. They waited. 40 seconds. 50. Then the 3 dots appeared, and then the reply. "Someone who filed a complaint 14 months ago and was told it was resolved. My name is Carla Webb." The room went quiet in the particular way of rooms where something significant has just shifted. Mia read the name twice. Then she looked up at Cross. "Marcus Webb's family," she said. It took 20 minutes to establish contact in a way that felt safe for Carla Webb, who had spent 14 months being managed by a system that had decided her brother's death was an administrative matter and not a human one. She was cautious on the phone when Cross's number came through, a different number than the VoIP line she'd used, which meant she had set up the anonymous contact deliberately and carefully. She was, Mia learned in the first 2 minutes of the call, a 44-year-old accountant from the east side of Portland who had been trying to find out what happened to her brother since February of the previous year and had hit a wall every time. "The case officer told me the hospital had cooperated fully with the review," Carla said. Her voice was steady in the way of someone who had been crying over this for long enough that the crying was done and what was left was clear and hard. "He said there was no evidence of institutional misconduct. He said the treating physician's notes were reviewed and found to be consistent with standard care." A pause. "I didn't have any reason not to believe him." "Ms. Webb," Cross said, "what made you reach out today?" "I have a source at the hospital," she said. "Someone who'd known about Marcus's case since the beginning. They called me this afternoon and told me things were moving, that people were suspended, that a nurse had been fired and reinstated, and there was a federal military inquiry." A pause. "They gave me Ms. Bennett's name." Mia leaned forward slightly. "Who is your source?" A longer pause this time. "She asked me not to say," Carla said, "but she told me she resigned because of what happened to Marcus, that she couldn't stay after what they made her do." Mia said, "Dr. Adele Fontaine." Iska silence on the line. "She said you'd probably figure it out," Carla said. Fontaine was reached by phone at 7:40 that evening. She was in Salem, 2 hours south, where she'd been working at a community health clinic since leaving Riverview Horizon 11 months ago. She had spent those 11 months, she explained in the measured tone of someone who had rehearsed this moment, and was now discovering that rehearsed and real were not the same, waiting for someone to find the thread she'd left. "I signed the complaint closure documentation," she said. "I want you to understand that." "You signed it?" Cross asked. He was on speaker. Reese was recording. "Diana told me it was a formality, that the case was being resolved through an internal care quality review that would be more thorough than the external complaint process. She told me my signature would help close the external complaint, so the internal review could proceed without overlap." A pause, rough at the edges. I believed her. I signed it. And then I waited for the internal review, and it never happened. And when I asked about it 3 months later, Diana told me it had been completed and the findings were confidential per board policy. She stopped. I was a physician on staff. I had no mechanism to verify that. Rourke, who had been listening from his bed with the particular focused quiet of a man who had been in enough debrief situations to know when to stay silent, shifted slightly. "Why didn't you go back to the oversight board?" Cross asked. "I tried," Fontaine said. "The case was closed. The case officer, Seibert, told me the matter was resolved through proper channels and there was no basis for reopening. He cited my own signature on the closure document." A pause. "He used my own signature against me." The room held that for a moment. "I resigned 4 months after that," Fontaine said. I couldn't stay in a building where that had happened and pretend it hadn't. I wrote what I wrote in my resignation letter because I needed something on record, even if it was only oblique. And I gave Carla Webb my contact information because she deserved to have someone who actually knew her brother's case. "Dr. Fontaine," Mia said, "why didn't you contact the military?" "When Commander Cross's inquiry started today, I didn't know about it until Carla called me this afternoon," Fontaine said. "I've been in Salem. I'm not connected to Riverview Horizons network anymore." A pause. "When Carla told me what was happening, I told her to reach out to you, and then She stopped. "I called an attorney." "Good," Cross said. "That's the right call." "I know." She said it like someone who had waited too long to make several right calls and was done waiting. "What do you need from me?" What they needed was a formal recorded statement, which Fontaine gave by phone with her attorney present, the call documented and logged by Reese at 8:15 p.m. What they needed after that was a means of getting the full picture: Fontaine's account, the signature trail, the Seibert timeline, Carla Webb's 14 months of unanswered questions, into a form that the State Oversight Board's newly opened investigation could use immediately. Reese handled that. She was methodical and fast, and Mia watched her work with the specific appreciation of someone who understood what it meant to be good at a procedural task when the stakes were high. The documentation was compiled, organized, and transmitted to the Oversight Board's investigative division by 9:30 p.m. At 9:47, Cross received a call from the Oversight Board's Director of Investigations. The call lasted 11 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at the room. Mia, Reese, Rourke's tired and alert face from the bed, Voss standing in the doorway because the hallway had gotten old, and said, "Seibert has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The board is treating the complaint closure as potentially fraudulent." Voss said quietly, "Good." Nobody else said anything for a moment because the word fraudulent was doing a lot of work, and it needed space to do it. Mia left the hospital at 10:15 p.m. 34 hours after her shift had started the previous evening, she walked through the main entrance past Earl at the security desk, who looked at her and said, "Long day, Ms. Bennett," and she said, "Yeah," and pushed through the doors into the night air. She sat in her car for a few minutes without starting it. The parking lot was mostly empty at this hour. The hospital's exterior lighting made everything look the particular orange-white of institutional nighttime, the kind of light that exists in no other context. She was so tired that the tiredness had looped back around into something almost meditative, not sleepy exactly, but very still, like the space after a storm when everything is quiet and wet, and the air has been completely rearranged. She thought about Marcus Webb. She thought about him not as a name anymore, but as a person who had come through this same building, through these same doors, and had encountered a system that valued its own administrative coherence more than it valued him. She thought about Carla Webb, who had spent 14 months being given the shape of resolution without the substance of it. She thought about Adele Fontaine, who had signed her name to a document she'd been told was a formality and had then watched what that signature was used for and had carried that for 11 months in a clinic in Salem. She didn't think she was responsible for any of that. She was clear on that. The sequence of events that had buried Marcus Webb's case had nothing to do with her, had happened long before she'd arrived at Riverview Horizon, and her involvement today had been accidental in the sense that she'd been in the right place with the right training on the right night and had made a series of choices that happened to pull a thread that had been waiting to be pulled. But she thought about the thing Rourke had said, people get hurt, and she thought that the other side of that was, sometimes the reason things stay buried is simply that the person who might pull the thread hasn't arrived yet. Not because no one cared, because the right collision of circumstances hadn't happened. She started the car. She drove home through empty Portland streets, all green lights and wet pavement and no traffic, and she was in bed before 11 and asleep before the thought she'd been forming fully finished. 3 weeks later, Riverview Horizon Medical Center sent a formal letter of apology to Carla Webb. It was not a form letter. Garland had written it personally, and it acknowledged specifically that the complaint closure process had been improperly managed, that the findings communicated to the Webb family had not been accurate, and that the hospital accepted institutional responsibility for the failure of care that preceded Marcus Webb's death. It included an offer of a formal meeting with Okafor and the board's patient advocacy liaison, and it included a commitment to a full case review with the family's attorney present. Carla Webb read the letter at her kitchen table on a Thursday morning and called Mia afterward, not because she needed to tell her anything specific, but because she needed to say it to someone who understood the whole shape of it. 14 months, Carla said. That's a long time to be told something is over when it isn't. Yes, Mia said. She was on her lunch break, sitting on the hospital's second-floor staff balcony, the October air cold and clean. Does it get resolved? Carla asked. The rest of it, Seibert, and the people who, it's in process, Mia said. The Oversight Board investigation is active. Seibert's facing a formal ethics review. The employment relationship between him and the parent organization is being audited. She paused. It's going to take time. Some of it's going to happen in places you can't see. I want to be honest with you about that. A silence. But it's real, Carla said. It's actually happening. Yes, Mia said. It's actually happening. The formal outcomes arrived in pieces, the way these things always do, not in one clean moment, but in a sequence of documented events spread across weeks. Victor Hale's internal review concluded in the 4th week of October. The independent reviewers found that he had been aware of at least 2 previous patient care complaints that had not been properly escalated and had taken no action. The board voted to terminate his employment with cause. He lost his operating license pending a state review. He did not contest it publicly. He disappeared from the hospital's website on a Friday afternoon, his bio replaced within hours by a placeholder that would eventually become Okafor's. Diana Whitmore's situation was more complicated and took longer, which was appropriate given that it was more complicated. Her involvement in the complaint closure, the deliberate use of Fontaine's signature, the coordination with Seibert, the active suppression of a legitimate patient death inquiry, placed her in a different category than Hale. In November, the State Medical Oversight Board referred her conduct to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential misconduct charges. Her nursing license was suspended pending the outcome. She hired an attorney and made no public statements. The Attorney General's review was ongoing as of December, but the direction of it was not ambiguous to anyone who read the preliminary filings. Robert Seibert resigned from his consulting positions 3 days after the Oversight Board's investigation became public. He issued a statement through his attorney that described his actions as procedural errors made in good faith, and did not acknowledge the consulting arrangement. No one in the medical community who read the statement believed it. The Oversight Board's Ethics Committee forwarded its findings to the state bar, since Seibert had a law license that predated his Oversight Board tenure. The bar opened its own review. The dominoes moved. Adele Fontaine returned to practice. Not at Riverview Horizon. She was done with Riverview Horizon, she'd told Mia that plainly. But at a hospital in Eugene where she'd been offered a position after the case became public. And someone in Eugene's medical community decided that a physician who had resigned over ethics was someone worth having. She sent Mia a text when she started. First day. It's okay. Thank you for pulling the thread. Mia read it twice and kept it. Ok. Rourke was discharged in the second week of October, 6 days after his surgery. He walked out of the building with his shoulder in a sling and Titan beside him on a lead, and Mia was at the nursing station when they came through, and he stopped and looked at her across the floor. She walked over. You're leaving, she said. Apparently the surgeons think I'm stable enough to be someone else's problem, he said. Titan was looking up at her. She scratched behind his ear, which he received with the same formal dignity as always. How's the shoulder? She asked. Going to be a project, he said. Physical therapy for 4 months minimum. They're talking about whether I go back to full ops. He said it without self-pity, just fact. We'll see. You will, she said. She didn't know that for certain, but she said it the same way she'd said he's going to be okay in the elevator that first night, because some things needed to be said regardless. He looked at her for a moment with the gray, absorbing eyes. Cross told me about the Webb case, he said, how it came together. It came together because Carla Webb was paying attention for 14 months, Mia said, and because Fontaine left a thread. And because you were standing on the sidewalk at 7:19 in the morning when you should have been driving home. She didn't have an answer for that. I'm going to pass your name to some people, he said. Medical contacts at the unit level, people who work with civilian facilities around the country. I want them to know you exist. He paused. Is that okay? Yes, she said. He nodded. He shifted the sling slightly, managing the weight. Mia. Yeah. You know what you did here, he said. Not just last night, the whole thing. You know what it was. She looked at him. I did my job. You did more than your job, he said. And you did it when there was nothing in it for you except getting it right. He paused. That's rarer than it should be. She didn't have an answer for that either. Some things didn't need one. Get some physical therapy, she said. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. He went. Titan went with him. That contained professional walk, oriented on his handler, all of his attention forward. She watched them until the elevator closed. In November, the week before Thanksgiving, Mia sat across from Dr. Okafor in the interim director's office. Hale's old office, which Okafor had rearranged immediately and completely, the furniture in different positions, the wall decorations gone, a whiteboard where the framed organizational chart had been, and they talked for an hour and a half. They talked about the protocol review, which was already underway, and Mia's role in it. They talked about what the review was finding, places where rigid policy had been written to protect administration from liability, rather than to protect patients from harm. The difference between those two things being significant, and in the case of Marcus Webb, fatal. They talked about what a better framework might look like, and Mia said things she'd been thinking for 8 months about the gap between the floor and the administration, about the way nurses were trained to defer to hierarchy in moments when the hierarchy was wrong, about what it actually cost to be a nurse who trusted her own judgment in a system designed to make that trust feel dangerous. Okafor listened to all of it without interrupting. At the end, she said, I want you to write that up, not a formal policy document, just your observations, what you saw, what the gaps were, what the costs were. I'm going to use it as a reference document for the review committee. Mia thought about it. My observations are going to include some uncomfortable things about how this institution handled the Webb case. Good, Okafor said. If it's not uncomfortable, it's not useful. Mia wrote it. It took 3 evenings and was 12 pages and was the most honest document she'd ever produced, including several things that were uncomfortable about her own decisions and her own moments of doubt during that long night and longer day. She sent it to Okafor without editing out the uncomfortable parts, because Okafor had said useful and she'd meant it. The review committee used it. Mia knew this because she was in 3 of the committee sessions and watched sections of it become working language for new protocols. Not Mia's exact words, but the shape of her thinking translated into policy. It was a strange thing to experience. She wasn't sure she had a word for it. Well, there are things that happen to people in institutions that never get completely resolved. Mia understood this by December. The outcomes in the Webb case were real and documented and ongoing, and the people who had made those decisions were facing consequences that were public and professional, and in Whitmore's case, potentially legal. But Marcus Webb was still dead. Carla Webb had still spent 14 months with the wrong answer. Adele Fontaine had still lost a year of her career. Those were not things that paperwork and policy reform could undo. They were part of the record now, accurate, visible, acknowledged, but they were still there. She thought about this in the particular way she'd developed over the months since October, which was not obsessively, but honestly, without the soft focus that made it easier to look at, but blurred the thing itself. She thought a lot about what it actually meant to work inside a system. The way systems absorbed individuals, the way they created conditions for both the worst decisions and the most courageous ones, the way the same structure that had suppressed Fontaine's concerns had also, eventually, provided the mechanism for those concerns to surface. She had not fixed the system. She knew that. The protocol review would improve things in specific, documentable ways and would create new complications that nobody could fully anticipate, because that was what institutions did. She had done something much smaller than fixing the system. She had made a correct decision on a bad night, and that decision had been the first in a sequence that led somewhere real. She thought about what Rourke had said. You did it when there was nothing in it for you except getting it right. And she thought that was probably the whole of it. Not heroism, not strategy, just the decision, in the ambulance bay, to walk toward the thing instead of away from it, and every decision after that being the same thing in a different form. She was back on the night rotation by then, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., the rhythm she'd settled into and recognized as her natural frequency. The ER was the ER. It didn't stop. It didn't acknowledge what had happened in any particular way. It just continued at its relentless pace, presenting whatever it was going to present and requiring whatever it required. A chest pain in Bay 2, an ankle fracture in 4, a toddler with a high fever and parents who were barely holding it together. She moved through all of it the same way she always had, with the same attention, the same precision, the same willingness to make the call she needed to make when the moment required it. Garrett found her in the supply room at 2 a.m. in December, refilling the IV cart, and he stood in the doorway and said, "Protocol Review Committee approved the new K9 response guidelines today." "I heard," she said. She kept counting. "They named the framework after the Webb case," he said. "The Webb Patient Advocacy Standard. Okafor pushed for it." She stopped counting. She stood there for a moment in the supply room with a box of IV tubing in her hands and thought about a man she'd never met, and a woman who'd spent 14 months being told the wrong thing, and a physician who'd resigned because she couldn't find another way to say this was wrong loudly enough. "Okay," she said. "You okay?" Garrett asked. "Yeah," she said. She put the tubing back on the shelf, made a note on the restocking list, and picked up the cart. "Let's go. Bay 6 needs a new drip." She walked out of the supply room and into the floor, where the monitors beeped and the lights were flat and permanent and the work continued exactly as it always did. And she did what she always did, which was to show up and pay attention and make the next right call. That was it. That was the whole thing. No one gave her a speech. No one held a ceremony. She would not have wanted either. She had her job back, she had her judgment intact, and the record was correct now. Accurate, visible, and attached to something that might prevent the next version of what happened to Marcus Webb from running as far as it ran. Some people spend their whole careers waiting to matter in a moment. One clean event where they do the right thing under pressure and the outcome proves it. Mia had had her moment. She knew it. And she also knew that the moment wasn't the point. The moment was just the one that happened to be visible. The point was every shift before it and every shift after. She pushed the cart to Bay 6, looked at her patient's chart, introduced herself with the same words she used every time. "Hi, I'm Mia. I'm your nurse tonight," and got to work.